Hello and welcome to this week's beginner's guide. Today we will be talking about all the perks that you can choose from when customizing a commander. Without a vice, you start with 3 perk points. There, we got 3 here, which basically means you're only going to be able to afford a handful of these nice starting bonuses. You can only select 1 perk from each category. So yeah, to further help new players understand the differences between each perk, we will be discussing the perks in order from my favorite perks to my least favorite perks for each of the 4 categories, starting with background, then colony supplement. After that, we'll talk about commander loadouts, and the last thing we'll talk about are the vices. As always, if there are any topics that you'd like to see me cover in future videos, then please let me know in the comments below. Okay, so we're ready to talk about backgrounds now. My favorite background is veteran because it only costs 1 perk point, which means you can spend other perk points on other nice starting bonuses. And the primary effect, the fact that you get 10 skill points at the beginning of the game, means that you can really clear out a lot more sites a lot quicker, allowing you to snowball your economy pretty quickly. So it is a really nice choice in the early game, especially for new players, but there are some other backgrounds which provide a couple other more long-term bonuses. I think my favorite one out of these expensive perks, my next favorite background overall is the Star Union Scholar because of the secondary effect. The rewards from pickup sites and structures being increased is very significant. I think it's like a factor of 2, so you can sometimes get 2 pops out of some of the food locations. If you get there early enough in the game, it doesn't take much food to create a new pop, so picking up some food can make you an extra person and give you a pretty significant advantage. Maybe even grab a sector earlier than you probably should be able to. The next background I like a lot is Covert Operative. I actually haven't played around with this too much, but the fact that it makes your society operations costs, it reduces that by 20% is pretty significant. It's not the biggest reduction to research cost out of all of these, and it's not the smallest, but I really do like operations. Having extra doctrines or doctrine slots for your doctrines is very useful. And on top of that, the secondary effect gives you a bonus in your covert defense, which is a pretty limited resource. Unlike a lot of things that you get here, you don't there aren't a lot of ways to really increase your covert defense. So this is quite valuable, I would say, in a multiplayer with a human opponent, but maybe less so if you're just kind of learning the game. After that, we have martial traditions, which actually used to be my favorite background. It used to be number 1, but they kind of nerfed the second aspect there. The ruthless killer used to give your commander a free turn after they killed a unit in combat, only once per turn. Actually, I think it used to be once per combat, but I'm not too sure about that. They may have actually changed that around so that you get 1 action point every turn and is a little bit more spread out. The reduction in weapon research cost is also very nice. So it's not at the bottom of the backgrounds. They didn't nerf it into obscurity, but it's pretty close. I would expect this background to go through a couple more changes since they've already altered it after 2 patches. After that, we have Skilled Diplomat, which is okay. It's relatively cheap. Having better relations with other races does make things cheaper and easier for you to get people inside of your space. It also is pretty useful if you just want to be peaceful and absorb settlements, using your influence. After that, we have Merchant Scion, which, basically makes dwellings a little bit cheaper to trade with. I'm not a big fan of that one, to be honest. The fact that you can cap out at 50% means that you're getting pretty close to that with just one thing right there. And also 10% off of 20 influence isn't a big deal when you're only making 5 influence per turn. So yeah, you can spend your perk points on more valuable things. And the last one is no background, which you probably shouldn't take. These are very nice bonuses, especially when compared to some of these other things down the line. So I'd recommend you get a background. All right, now we're ready to talk about colony supplement. My favorite colony supplement has to be military detachments for the same reason that I really like veteran. It basically allows you to clear out more sites quicker and safely. If you have more units, there's less of a chance that you're going to lose one in a battle. So that is an amazing first choice for new players. But if you like, you know, playing peacefully and working on your economy, you can take the colonist cryopods. They're almost as good as the military detachment, maybe a little bit better for veteran players who know how to use their colonists and how to take advantage of the recreation dome. The fact that you don't have to research a recreation dome is a pretty big advantage, but it's, I think, not quite as good as just having a better military force. After that, I would say data repository is your next best choice, but it's very random. Getting 2 random texts means you can get something you want, something you need, or you can get something that's completely useless to you. And for 1 perk point, I would say getting 2 useless texts is just, it's not worth it. I would say it's almost better to take no colony supplement, especially if that lets you take a loadout or a background that you really want. And the last thing, the last colony supplement is the energy cache. Having 300 extra energy is just, it's not useful. There's almost no situation where I could see that being useful, because you're gonna be able to make a lot of energy pretty easily in the early game, even with the like military detachments here. Having more units, you're gonna be able to support quite a bit more than what you have. So yeah, there's no point in spending a perk point on that. No colony supplement is simply just better than energy cache because it means you can use a perk point elsewhere. All right, let's talk about commander loadouts. I really like the assault equipment because of the weapon that you get. The fact that it's repeating means if an enemy staggers your commander, you still get 2 more attacks, which is quite useful. The sniper rifles require full action, so if somebody staggers your hero, they can't use the sniper rifle at all. So that means that this weapon is quite a bit better than the weapon you get for the sharpshooter equipment. The perks are slightly worse, but not much worse. They both get range specialist, which increases your damage with ranged weapons, but this guy is supposed to take cover, so he's got a skill which increases their accuracy when they're in cover. I think it's by 15%. This one increases accuracy by 5% and crit chance by 5%, which is really nice. I really like having extra crit chance, but still, the fact that you need all 3 of your actions to use this weapon, it means it's secondary to the assault one. If you can trade out for a weapon from a site that can do repeating damage, then the sharpshooter is the better choice, but it's random. You can't rely on getting something with a repeating attack. After that loadout, I think my next favorite one is the close combat equipment, because your hero has more HP and can deal a lot of damage. It usually helps to run them forward into melee range and to try and take out a couple enemies that way. If your hero falls in combat, it's not that bad. I think it just takes 3 turns for them to come back, which is better than any other unit that you have. If you lose your commander, it's not a big deal. After that, I think the next best loadout is the assault vehicle. I do like that it comes with 3 skills. You get a little bit of piloting and 2 levels of vitality, which is quite valuable, but you are paying 2 perk points for it, so I don't think it's worth it, especially when you consider that the vehicles take up a primary weapon slot, and that means to take advantage of what you get from the sites, your loot, you're going to want to trade out this assault rifle relatively quickly, or the assault vehicle relatively quickly. After that is the support vehicle. I haven't played around with commanders that are 100% support, and I'm sure they are quite nice, but something tells me they're not quite as competitive in the early game as these other loadouts. The fact that they're supposed to support other units means that once you get nice tier 3, tier 4 units, that could be worth it, but I just don't see it being worth it until you get to the later point in the game, which will be hard to do if you don't have enough advantages in the early game. And the last loadout we'll talk about is the basic equipment, which you should never take because it comes with 0 skills. All of these give you free skills, which means you don't have to spend the skill points you get from level ups on them. So yeah, you take one of these other ones. Don't take the basic equipment. And now we are finally ready to talk about vices. My favorite vice is Kleptomaniac. It gives you a random mod. It can be a tier 1 mod or a tier 3 mod, which is usually worth it. Even if you just get the tier 1, it's worth taking the risk, because getting a tier 3 at the very first turn, on the very first turn, is amazing. All you need to do is just remember to take advantage of it, to see what you get and make the most out of that. The minus 10 energy from your empire is pretty bad for the first few turns. Losing a percentage of your food income isn't terrible at the beginning of the game, but it's pretty awful once you get to the mid game, and you can compensate for this loss in energy relatively quickly if you just build the colony building that gives you 10 energy a turn, the beginning one. Then you've countered that, you've offset that penalty, I think, in the first 5 or 6 turns. It's pretty easy to build that building, so yeah, I would recommend you get that, and then you can just play around with that advantage. After Kleptomaniac, I would say Decadent is the next best trait, and that's mostly because I like tanky heroes. Having 10 more HP on your hero makes them a lot harder to kill. At the very beginning of the game, you're only making like 25 food per turn, so 10% of that is only like 2.5, especially considering how little food you need to actually get a new pop, and the difference that's going to make at the beginning of the game. It's something that new players don't even really need to think about. You don't have to worry about that. Kleptomaniac is probably a better choice for people who have won a couple scenarios. Decadent is probably the best choice for people who have never played a scenario or a map in Planetfall. After that, I'd say your next best option is no vice. I actually really do not like any of these other ones. So if you can't afford to take no vice and get the other things that you want, do that. The boons that you get with these other ones are awful. They're not worth it. So after that, I would recommend you get Party Animal. It's the next best one. It's still pretty awful. Reducing your production by 10% can be offset by certain things, like if you're playing the Amazons, you can try and get a lot of forests in your space, and then your production will be offset. But it's not really worth just giving your units an extra 100 morale. 100 morale by itself doesn't provide anything. You need 200 morale to get extra crit chance. So yeah, if you combine that with other things, it will get you to that breaking point, to that threshold, but it's, in my opinion, not worth it. There's a lot of ways to get morale, and it's not worth crippling your entire economy just so that your commander stack is maybe slightly more likely to get a crit, but you know, with the way percentages work, that doesn't guarantee anything. After that, I'd say stubborn is your next best option. It's still pretty awful. Reducing your knowledge income will hurt you quite a bit unless you're playing the assembly. The assembly have battlefield doctrines, which will give you research without you having to, generate it in your colonies. So it's a way to get around this malice, but still, you want to be able to research a lot in your colonies so that you can power through your tech tree to get the better mods and the better units and spells as early as possible. The extra resistance to status effects can be nice, but I really don't see that being as impactful as just like this extra 10 HP on your commander, or having this mod, which can be super powerful or just kind of okay. And then after that, the last vice that you should consider is cruel. In fact, if you're gonna be considering cruel, you should just take kleptomaniac. There's no redeeming qualities about it. It basically makes it so that your colonies are more likely to be upset, to cause problems, and you have to waste a worker generating happiness. You have to build the recreation centers, and then you have to put a worker on it to just get past that +4 happiness. I believe each worker makes 3 happiness, so it's just like it's even more than a whole worker. You have to put a whole worker on that, and all it does is increase your crit chance, a single unit's crit chance, which if your unit dies, if it falls in combat, it's just like, that's completely worthless. Why would I want that? So yeah, don't take cruel. Cool. Now that we're done talking about the perks, we can talk about my plans for the next 2 beginner's guides. We're going to talk about the Scifish faction next week, and then 2 weeks after that we'll talk more about a different NPC faction, and we'll just kind of alternate between NPC factions and other topics. I'm not really sure what topic I want to cover after the Scifish NPC faction. I think a little bit of variety will keep this interesting for me and my viewers. So if you've got any suggestions, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So far we've had people request this video. This was one of the requested videos. Somebody wanted to know what I recommend for vices and the other backgrounds. And then somebody else requested that I talk more about units, so that's why we're talking about the NPC factions. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, to subscribe, to share with some friends. See you around for the next one.